Eyes on Sharjah Events. Sharjah Events.
This event in particular, I believe, is a little bit, not a little bit, actually a lot of, like if we're going to put it on a meter, we're going to say it's very up high when it comes to it being underrated, because it might sound a little bit niche, but honestly, the Sharjah International Narrators Forum is for everybody. Just like if you're interested in reading, you're interested in culture, you're interested in heritage, tradition, learning about people, then this is the place that you have to be and check out. It's running from the 18th to the 20th of September, which is tomorrow. And in my opinion, 3 days are not enough. And joining me today is a guest. He is a recurring guest, a recurring face here on Eyes On. And it's great to see him and have him here. He is an author, and he is a young author. That is, we need to highlight that 100 times, because that is something wonderful and honestly incredible. And his name is Sanith, and he is just joining us right here at the studio to talk about his participation at the Sharjah International Narrators Forum. First of all, how are you doing, Sanith?
I'm doing great today.
We are very happy to be having you right here at the studio. Now, here's the thing. Storytelling. A lot of people would think storytelling or narration is sort of something that feels very old, very from the past, something we do not engage in that much, even though technically even gossiping is a way of storytelling. So the concept of narration and storytelling, what got you into it?
Storytelling, right. So I've actually been working on so many concepts, projects of my own for a really long time now. It started off with my publications, my books, the little articles they submitted to newspapers on the things which I noticed in my day-to-day life. And so over time, I began to try and look at a way to share more and more complex forms and abstract thinking patterns with children. And so I found storytelling to be quite the perfect way to do it.
I can see that very much, because children, if you remember when you were a child, well, you are kind of, no offense to you, you are still kind of a child, but I remember like being when I was much younger, and even you probably remember when you were much younger, storytelling was one of the forms that engaged you, or at least connected you with your parents, your family, maybe heritage and culture. And this is basically what the Sharjah International Narrators Forum is doing, is trying to connect cultures and trying to spread them. So how did you become involved with the Sharjah International Narrators Forum?
I got involved with the Sharjah International Narrators Forum through an invitation to take part after the publication of my books and a couple of other events that I had worked on. And so back in 2021, I was invited to take part under the team at the time, which was Tales of Animals. And so Tales of Animals, I had a central focus on a story about pirates, a Sri Lankan folktale. And from there, I've been regularly taking part each and every year.
Wow, mashallah. And you were there also at the Institute for Heritage when it was when we had the Sharjah Heritage Days. And you were telling stories back then. Now, Tales of Plants. What came to your mind the moment you thought of that theme?
Tales of Plants, I thought that it was absolutely perfect. This year, I'd been wondering for a long time what the topic we'd actually come up with for the International Narrative Forum. When I heard Tales of Plants, I knew that this was perfect, because this is something that sounds really bland at first when you're just listening to it. But there's actually so much depth to it right here, because it's not just a case of, you know, the leaves, the roots, the stems. It's a story about us and the world we live in. Because without plants, we wouldn't be there. But without us, the plants would be there for much longer, I'm afraid. And so plants, I actually loved it. I thought this would be a great way to be able to share the importance of preserving, documenting, and promoting the rich history behind plants and our species, the role that they continue to play today, and what exactly they mean to us, to ensure that future generations, of course, take care of the world we live in.
Absolutely, because sustainability is, we are in the year of sustainability, and sustainability is one of the key things the UAE is focusing on. And plants, taking care of them and keeping them alive is part of that whole transition towards zero neutrality and all of that. And I love how something simple, like telling a story of a plant, can be part of something so big. And through the Tales of Plants, you actually have another story to share with us today that you have written recently, and it happens to be about my favorite plant, or my favorite tree, the Raf tree. Can you tell us about that?
Yes, actually a couple of weeks ago, before the event was coming up, I thought to myself, this year I'd like to do something a little different because in the previous years, of course, I'd done some researching, I'd adapted some stories to go in line with the themes, but this year I was thinking I could try something entirely unique. And now I was at the time working on my fifth publication, and that was around a different topic. And so a few weeks before the event, I thought to myself, why not I try and make a story for children instead? Something I could read out loud at the forum in printed form. So I thought, yeah, that would be a nice idea. And a couple of weeks down the line, some editing, some writing, and of course some illustration help from my mother a lot, I was able to come up with Peacefully Powerful Gaff.
Wow. Peacefully Powerful Gaff. So why the Gaff tree, and how did that become part of your thinking process, and how did you pick it? Was it the most obvious choice when it came to a plant living here in the UAE, or did you think of other things, maybe like the palm tree? Because a lot of people would think the UAE desert, palm tree, dates, palm tree, that's all we think of usually. But when you think about the Gaff tree, it's sort of put or cast to the side sometimes.
I actually, when I was already planning my stories, even before I came up with the idea of a book, what I was trying to do was relate in between the plants and the different aspects of humans themselves. Like some trees have traits like us. For example, the redwood, the oak tree, they can be said to wise, they're strong, they're sturdy. So I was just trying to see and relate how many traits I could with humans. And so the Gaff tree came to my mind at the time. Strong, sturdy, and I was also thinking about the history of some plants, the roles that they have played in building our own cultures and societies. And so when I was just going through the different trees that I recall from my mind, the Gaff tree eventually came up. And of course, it's the UAE's national tree, and it has played a massive role in shaping this country. When all of the leaders of the past, when they would gather together under these Gaff trees to have their meetings, and how the Gaff tree would always endure regardless of what climatic condition, to serve as some sort of refuge in the arid desert where ideas, thoughts can be discussed and brought to the table. And the Gaff tree, another thing, I also had a very personal connection to it because I remember the Year of Tolerance. I wrote my second book at the time. That was Tolerance for Happiness, and I remember looking at the symbol it had back then. It was the Gaff tree, and I just knew it had to be the Gaff tree.
That's beautiful, honestly. I might be a little bit biased because the Gaff tree is my favorite tree, so I'm a bit biased and I love it very much. But yeah, this is beautiful, and I understand that there is a connection. If you truly look into the UAE and the place that we live in, that there is a true connection between the Gaff tree. And I love the fact that you connected it with sturdiness and resilience, because it truly is a resilient plant. If you want to live and succeed in the desert, you have to be quite resilient. Now, speaking about resilience, the concept of storytelling, we all know that it's been there for many eras. It's been resilient in it as a concept. And right now, we've got new forms of storytelling. We kind of adapted it. That's what we do as humans. We adapt. But as a young person, as somebody from Gen Z, which we can safely say you're from Gen Z, as somebody from Gen Z, do you think that there's a significance to things like the Sharjah International Narrators Forum, preserving narration, and just the concept of storytelling?
Yes, there is a massive significance right there, because storytelling, even though it's seen as a bland bygone art of the past by so many, what many fail to realize is that storytelling is actually everywhere around us. There is not a single one of us out here without a story. We have all got something to us. There is something, regardless of how we perceive it, how we look at it, and how we say it out loud. The Sharjah International Narrators Forum intends to signify that with culture, heritage, and rich traditions over time. Storytelling, I feel that even though the eras have passed by, life is so much different now than what it had been before, it still persists, because even though it evolves, and you could say it happens in so many different ways, just uniquely suited to each individual, I believe it has two very specific points that retain always. Number one is the story itself. Of course, that has to be having a level of degree right there that helps you move on, and the way you tell that story. For some, it's just a matter of having a picture, even looking at it and being able to tell a story.
Wow.
But when you're trying to tell a story out loud, for example, like what we intend to do at the Sharjah International Narrators Forum, you gotta make sure that it resonates. You have something that can help you engage with your audience. Simply enough, make sure that your audience is in the story with you and participating. Even if it's something not directly of their time, something in a world that's so much different to theirs, your audience, your story, and you should have a link through feelings and emotions somewhere.
Wow, that makes a lot of sense. It is a sort of, it's a connection, creating a connection between the people in front of you and finding that middle space between them. And speaking of, you said earlier that in previous editions of the forum, since you were invited in 2021, you had to adapt some stories for the forum. This is the first time where you actually give in and write your own story. But previously, how do you prepare for that? How do you, like you said, you want to connect to people? You mentioned earlier that, and I believe in the first participation, you spoke about a parrot story, and that story had to do with your own Sri Lankan heritage. So how did you create that connection with taking this story from your heritage, your culture, and then passing it on to an audience who's probably quite multicultural from all around the world?
The parrot story in particular, I'll use that as an example. I had been researching, trying to figure out what sort of stories might be working best in a modern context. So of course I came across a whole group of stories. Some I felt were a bit too slow, some I felt the audience might just not understand. And of course, most importantly, I had to keep in mind of the age group of the children I was going to be telling this tale to. So I had to come up with something I feel that could fit in as many ages as possible, something that could even fall in line with my age without a problem. And so the parrot story came up, and now it's a traditional Sri Lankan tale. It's a story about a parrot who takes care of his sick parents and visits a rice farm over days. The farmer has a different impression of what he's doing, and over time they both learn what exactly each other's intentions are. And of course there's a happy ending for them, and the parrot is able to take home food for his sick parents every single day. And so that story, I actually, rather than changing the content of what was there, I had to figure out an appropriate style to narrate it out loud, to make sure that my audience was always in line with the story, moving by. More or less, it's not a case of changing the content of stories when it's been to making it suitable for audiences. It's a matter of how I was able to tell those stories to them.
Interesting. So it's not about the story itself, because it's highly likely, as you mentioned, because when you said the story, you gave me the context of it, it felt quite universal.
Yeah.
That's what we can notice with a lot of stories, that quite often than not, yes, they adapt to some areas that they live in. For example, I'm not sure if you heard about this story or this creature, but there's a creature created in a lot of Arabian or GCC countries. Her name is very funny, Emirate Gaila, which basically literally means the donkey of the afternoon. And that story, or the noon donkey, and she's basically half human and I believe half donkey. Correct me if I'm wrong. Tell me if I'm wrong. 4215. That can happen because I do forget the story sometimes because it's been a long time. And they created it. They basically told children, if you leave your house around noon, she's gonna come over and kidnap you. The reason why is because it's incredibly hot around noontime and they don't want the children to run around. But then we've heard and seen similar stories, cautionary tales, where they kind of adapt to the weather, the time, the whatever it is, in different cultures, where they create a creature and they say, if you leave the house at this time, so and so is going to kidnap you. So there is a universal part of it. Like you said, the parrot taking care of his parents. This is something we've heard many times, something that is encouraged. Taking care of your parents when they're older, taking care of your parents when they are sick or not feeling well. So there is universality. And I love the fact that he said it's all about the way you say it rather than changing the story too much. So what are the techniques that you use when you're telling the stories? Is it about tone? Is it about demeanor, the way you move, or all of the things together?
If I were to actually be very specific, I'd have to write my sixth book. Because honestly, the first thing I do, like take an example, I take a look at my audience. Who am I dealing with? The age group, whether the kids seem to be distracted, whether they're on their phones sometimes, unfortunately.
Yeah.
And sometimes whether they're just bored and out of, energy. So basically, based on things like that, you can figure out how exactly you want to put your tone, you want to throw your pitch at them, and what exact story you're going to narrate to them. The speed, the flow. It's all very dependent on what your audience actually is. The story's content generally remains the same, unless, of course, they just seem to have a really short attention span. And then gradually, I have to remove certain elements to make sure that the core remains, that the story's message is conveyed fully. But, of course, there'll be a bit of losses here and there, but that at least they have something that will stick with them at the end of the day. So it's a case of having sometimes it's a case of having a car and you're driving at 60 miles an hour and you're constantly fixing it while trying to prevent it from overheating sometimes.
I love that. I love that very much. And I love the fact that you said you just take your wins, whichever or whoever pays attention. That's great. If they don't, they just don't. Like you said, you take your wins and you take your losses as well. But at the end, I'm pretty sure that the majority is engaged and having fun.
Yes, indeed.
And speaking about engagement and just you yourself, you're having fun talking and telling these stories. And that's quite difficult to get the encouragement, to get the courage itself to stand up and say a story, get into it, feel it all, and just having the ability to stand up and talk in front of a group, even if they're children, especially if they're children, because sometimes children are very, very honest. They're too honest, especially the younger ones, and then trying to win them over. It could be difficult to do that, and getting over that, especially getting over your fears of standing up in front of the public. What can you tell people who have an abundance of stories and imagination, a wide imagination and ability to say and also be in your place on it, but they're just too scared to stand up on a stage? How can they get over it? And how can they face a crowd?
The first thing I'd like to tell all of you is that in this world, most of the time when we do great things, we're being told that we will constitute for in the future. Oh, hey man, you're going to do great. One day you will be an excellent writer. One day you'll be an excellent doctor. One day you'll be an excellent... All sorts of different things are there. But the thing is, you have the chance to do that right now. You don't have to keep all of your abilities and talent in reserve, especially when you have the ability to go for it right now. You have that all at your disposal. You can be able to inspire and do great things at this very age. So don't let the fact that, sure, I got time, I can do this when I'm a bit older, when I'm a lot more mature. Don't let that concept ever grasp you at all. So that's one thing. And another thing is, look to your own past, especially when it comes to something. For example, storytelling, speaking up to a crowd. Now, go to an event yourself. Look at how a person speaks to you. Look at how they maneuver, how they control the crowd, how they garner their attention, how they influence, spread, and give them a positive message at the end of the day. If you have a really hard trying to figure out how to do it, that's one of the first things you should do. And when it comes to overcoming your fear, remember this. We all will have our own little slip-ups from time to time. There will be moments we are unsure of what we're doing, but the more and more we get ourselves involved, the more and more we practice. It doesn't have to be massive crowd at first. Try telling a story to your friends, for example. Try telling a story to your cat or dog, and even to the mirror. Sometimes that stigma of they might think about something can easily be overcome just when you take a look at yourself sometimes. Just try it out anywhere. Try it out on anyone. And without you knowing, over time, you'll grow more and more confident to share your thoughts with much more loud crowds and forums. And if you're still unsure sometimes about how to move on, try and record what you want to say. You can always share it online, and in this interconnected era, pretty much nothing is impossible. So having said that, I'd like to share a little story of my own that actually inspired me to pick on storytelling so many years after I'd moved on with so many different projects.
Please.
When I was very small, I used to have this massive problem, really embarrassing problem of not being able to know my north, east, west, and south. Every single time I'd mess that up.
I mean, a lot of people, if you ask them what is right, what is left, they will forget it. So it's normal, still happening to a lot of adults as well.
And so in the end, I was able to find a solution to that in a way I guess I never would have expected. But of course, it wasn't my solution. It was my parents' solution, actually. So what you see is my mom went and drew a picture. She went and drew a picture of an elephant, a big blue elephant. He appeared to be kicking a bucket of water somewhere, and he just, looked a bit sad for some reason. Now, that picture, of course, I couldn't quite place it. So when my parents asked me, my dad asked me, Sanith, what do you think this means? I just stared at it for a while, and then I said, a blue elephant, without much detail at all. And then he told me, naughty elephant was sad. Naughty elephant, the elephant's kicking the bucket, and sad because his face looks sad. And then he told me to remove just remove all letters but keep the first, NEWS. North, east, west, south. And just like that, I was able to remember all 4 directions. It's a lovely acronym, and I was able to learn it through just one picture and a few words from my parents. That was a story of its own, and I felt that this very thing can be applied in all sorts of ways. And the Sharjah International Narrators Forum, which focuses on culture and heritage, it can also share the same message. It can share modern problems and ways to address them, and how exactly our generation should think while remembering the accumulated wisdom and knowledge of our forefathers without ever getting ourselves in the wrong direction at any given time.
Those are just beautiful words, and they make a lot of sense, and especially the last part. You create your own experiences, but you also can use the wisdom of the past. Thank you so much for joining us here, Sanith. It's always a pleasure chatting to you and chatting about your various endeavors. And we look forward to your various endeavors as well, future ones and the ones at the Sharjah International Narrators Forum. That, guys, is still ongoing until tomorrow. Tomorrow is the last day, so get a chance to head down there. If you can, look it up, check it out, and find out what can suit you. Take yourselves, your friends, your cousins, your family, your children, your neighbors, whoever it is, take them down there and experience something, a little bit of a cross-cultural global moment right here in the Emirate of Sharjah. Once again, thank you so much, Sanith. And we're going to take a break, and coming up next, more Sharjah Stories. The House of Wisdom has a quarterly book club series, and it's happening, and it's going to be all about environmental sustainability issue and raising awareness about it. And finally, if you want to volunteer, there is a volunteering opportunity happening very, very soon by the Sharjah Book Authority. That should be a hint enough for you about what the event is. We're going to be talking about that and so much more right here on Pulse 95.